Before we begin, we would like to personally thank all of our viewers for helping support the channel. Without you guys, none of this would be possible. Every comment, like, and subscription means a lot to us. So if you're a real fan of the channel, then please don't forget to turn on your post notifications and leave a like. It only takes one click, yet it would honestly mean the world to us. Don't forget to watch until the end and comment down below with your thoughts or provide recommendations for future videos. With that being said, let's begin. Throughout NBA history, there have been plenty of major changes that have altered the game. The first known dunk in a basketball game happened all the way back in 1936, but it didn't catch on professionally until the 1960s. Then there was the three-point line that came into the NBA in 1979, followed by the first Air Jordans donned by MJ himself in 1985, which ushered in the modern era of NBA footwear and clothing. Above all those transcendent changes, however, was the implementation of the 24-second shot. Welcome to NBA Insider. Over the years, the NBA has become an outstanding league that has implemented plenty of changes designed to increase its everlasting business. Strategies have changed, the equipment has gotten better, the athletes have become bigger, stronger, and faster, and the leagues have tinkered with the rules generally to maintain fan interest. However, the basic conditions and rules under which the games are played still remain. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, in the early 1950s, professional basketball as a whole was struggling. Back in 1949, when the National Basketball League and the Basketball Association of America came together to form the NBA, the league did not feature the high-scoring, run-and-gun type of games that modern fans have become so familiar with. As a matter of fact, NBA games were known to be boring, slow-moving, low-scoring affairs, in which one team would grab an early lead and then spend the rest of the game simply holding on to the ball until the clock ran out. The only thing the trailing team could do was foul, which would lead to games becoming free throw shooting contests. One of the first and more notorious examples of stall ball, as it was also known, took place back in late November of 1950 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when a crowd of 7,021 fans arrived to the Minneapolis Auditorium to watch an NBA game between the Fort Wayne Pistons and the Minneapolis Lakers. This was a new experience for many fans, considering it was one of the first games that had been played following the NBL and BAA merger less than 16 months before. Despite this, the new league was still trying to find its place, as each game represented a chance to win and lose fans. This matchup featured some of the greatest basketball stars of the time, including the likes of NBA legend George Mikan. Mikan, a 6'10" college prodigy, joined the Lakers back in 1947 and dominated games right from the start. His rebounding, shot blocking, and killer hook shot elevated him to becoming the signature player of the new NBA.
Basketball, a game of giants. And there's number 99, George Mikan, one of the greatest. He set most of the game's scoring records, and his fighting spirit carried his teams to victory.
Considered to be one of the first superstars of the league, he led his team to 7 championships, won 3 scoring titles, and was so dominant, rules were named after him, including the widening of the lane from 6 to 12 feet, also known as the Mikan rule. Aside from him, the roster also included a 6'7" future Hall of Famer named Vern Mickelson and former Stanford All-American Jim Pollard, making the Minneapolis Lakers one of the most feared teams in the league. On the other hand, although they had a fine center in Larry Faust, the Fort Wayne Pistons did not match up in talent. Due to this, the coach of the Pistons, Murray Mendenhall, had devised a plan. You see, Mendenhall's philosophy for the game was quite simple. If a team wasn't as good as its opponent, the only way it could stay close in points was by holding and dribbling the ball the entire game. Therefore, if the Lakers never got the ball, they could never score. If they could never score, they could never win the game. So with the buzzer sounded and the clock ticking, the opening tip went to the Fort Wayne Pistons. As soon as he gained possession of the ball, Ralph Johnson, the Pistons' point guard, began following his orders of holding the ball. For the better part of 48 minutes, under the Pistons' possession, the ball moved aimlessly from one side of the court to the other as seconds ticked by. At first, the Lakers players stood around, not knowing what to do. However, in desperation, they began to resort to intentionally fouling to get the ball back. At the time, however, the rule book awarded a free throw for non-shooting fouls, so the Lakers' adjustment effectively morphed the game into a glorified free throw shooting contest. At halftime, the score was 13-11 in favor of the Lakers, with Mikan scoring 12 of the Lakers' points. As the game continued, the referees began yelling at the Pistons players and at Coach Mendenhall, as the fans in the stands began to boo and stomp their feet in anger. Worst of all, despite having a big crowd that night, there were fans reading newspapers in the stands, while some walked out and demanded their money back, and others swore never to buy another ticket to a professional basketball game. This was the league's worst nightmare. The second half was even worse. The Lakers, despite being annoyed at the Pistons' strategy, began following the trend, with each side holding the ball for minutes at a time. The two teams only scored 13 points combined in the second half. As the clock ticked down to 0 in the fourth quarter, the Pistons held on to a 1-point lead. In the end, they walked away with a 19-18 victory over the defending champs while holding George Mikan to a game-high 15 points. To this day, this game remains the lowest-scoring game in league history. For coaches, this matchup provided a new tactical insight, and so following this game, other NBA teams began to use this strategy. Former premier guards of that era, such as Dick McGuire, Slater Martin, Bob Davies, and Andy Phillips, would also dribble until they were fouled, and the parade from one free throw line to the other would once again begin. Just 3 years following that game, 106 fouls were called and 128 free throws shot in a playoff game between the Boston Celtics and Syracuse Nationals, while NBA player Bob Cousy scored 30 points from the foul line alone. Then, in 1954, the Syracuse Nationals beat the New York Knicks 75-69, with free throws outnumbering baskets 75-34. Due to this, the league began to tank in fan viewership and attendance. The NBA knew something had to be done. At the time, Maurice Podoloff, the former president of the BAA, and the man that had negotiated the merger between the BAA and the NBL to form the NBA, was put in charge to ensure the survival of the NBA and professional basketball. Podoloff knew the only way the league was going to flourish was by making sure the games were exciting to the people who paid his and the player's salary, the fans. So 2 days after, he summoned all league officials and the 2 referees from the infamous game to figure out ways to make the NBA game more fan-friendly. As they slightly fiddled with the rules, they came up with several changes that would be introduced in the coming year, including the expanding of the key from 6 feet to 12 feet in width, designed to reduce congestion under the basket and to force teams to rely more on distance shooting. They thought these changes would increase scoring and the impact of one dominant player, George Mikan. Unfortunately for them, it didn't work. Scoring was still low, fewer fans came out to the games, and teams began to fold. By 1954, NBA viewership plummeted, causing the 18 original NBA teams to decline to just 9. As the pace of the game had slowed to a halt, so too had the NBA's notoriety. The league became faced with economic viability as paying customers began walking out of the games. With professional basketball's existence in jeopardy, there came a solution: another rule change. Unlike the previous ones, however, this one actually had a chance. You see, at the time, a man by the name of Danny Biasone tasked himself with saving the NBA. As the owner of the NBA's Syracuse Nationals franchise, Biasone argued that the league needed to place a time element in the game. After all, other sports had limits. In baseball, they got 3 outs to score. In football, 10 yards and 4 downs, or the ball was lost. But in basketball, if the other team had the lead and a good ball handler, they could play around all night. A limit on how long a team could hold the ball would prevent one side from hanging on to the ball until they were fouled, or until the clock ran out, forcing both teams to play the game at a faster pace. Although Biasone may not have been the first person to suggest a shot clock, he was the man who convinced the NBA to use it. Back in 1946, Biasone paid $5,000 to the NBL for his Syracuse Nationals, a team he had founded, to have the right to play in the new professional basketball league. Then in 1946, the Nationals were absorbed as part of the merger, becoming an original NBA franchise. While destroying opponents and finishing with a 42-30 record, the franchise made it all the way to the NBA Finals. However, as the team entered the 1954 season, they became faced with the lingering fear that the NBA was in jeopardy. Since Maurice Podoloff failed to implement a rule designed to increase scoring and make the game more fan-friendly, NBA fan attendance was still struggling. With his franchise now part of the league, Biassone's investment was in trouble. So along with his partners, Danny decided to come up with a solution that would not only save the NBA, but the hopes of his team. At first, he began urging fellow club owners to put in a time limit for shooting. After analyzing box scores from the previous season, Danny, along with Leo Ferris, the general manager of the Syracuse Nationals, came to the conclusion that basketball was most exciting when teams took 60 shots each, or 120 per game. Since games were 48 minutes, or 2,880 seconds long, that number was divided by the number of shots taken in a game, which led to an optimal figure of 1 shot every 24 seconds.
In August of 1954, the Board of Governors in the NBA met in Syracuse, and one of their jobs was to watch a scrimmage at Vocational High School. And at that scrimmage, the 24-second clock was inaugurated. And afterwards, the Board of Governors voted and said, we need the clock. Danny Biassone, who was very persuasive, said, we need the clock, and the clock was put in. And Danny Biassone arrived at the 24-second clock with a very simple mathematical formula. A basketball game in the NBA of 48 minutes is 2,880 seconds. The average number of shots taken in the year before by NBA teams was 60 per team, or 120 per game. You divide 2,880 by 120, voila, 24 seconds.
From such a simple formula came a change that completely reinvigorated professional basketball, a rule that is now hard to imagine the game ever did without, giving a team 24 seconds to attempt a shot or else lose possession of the ball. As if that wasn't good enough, to deal with the matter of excessive fouling, the Board of Governors also adopted a rule limiting the number of fouls per team per quarter, with an extra free throw after a team committed 6 personal fouls in a period, which each foul becoming a shooting foul after the limit was reached. The two rules complemented each other perfectly. Now, all Danny needed to do was convince the rest of the NBA that in order to provide a well-balanced game that would force teams to shoot while creating excitement in fans, this new 24-second shot clock would have to be added. At first, the league decided to experiment with the shot clock during the Syracuse Nationals exhibition games. But instead of a huge clock towering over the court, a recruit would hold a stopwatch while standing on the sideline and yelling out time whenever 24 seconds elapsed during a possession. Then, on October 30th, 1954, in a game between the Rochester Royals and the Boston Celtics, the shot clock officially debuted. By tip-off the following season, there was a shot clock being operated in every NBA arena. The innovation was an immediate success. During the first season of its introduction, the pace of the game immediately improved as team scoring increased by 14 points per game, and scoring improved from 79.5 points per game to 93.1. By 1958, the average was 106 points per game, and the average number of shots rose from 75.4 to 86.4. By 1959, every team was averaging more than 100 points per game, with the Boston Celtics becoming the first NBA team to do so. Most importantly, however, fan excitement soared as attendance had increased by 40%, and the NBA was on its way to becoming the behemoth as we know it today. If it hadn't been for the invention of the 24-second shot clock, the NBA as we know it would almost certainly not exist. What do you think? Write your honest thoughts in the comment section down below. Was the 24-second shot clock as important as it was set out to be? One thing's for sure, of all the potential fixes to today's game, such as widening of the court, banning intentional fouls, and redefining shooting fouls, it's safe to say that the introduction of the shot clock is the one and only rule that saved the NBA from dying.